Welcome, I'm James A. Zimoha and you're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. Russia and Ukraine accuse each other of violating an agreed 3-day pause in fighting. Lebanon says Israeli strikes killed 39 despite a ceasefire deal agreed last month. And virus-hit cruise ship arrives in Tenerife as medics await passengers. Russian President Vladimir Putin says the Ukraine conflict may be coming to an end and has raised the possibility of talks in a third country. Meantime, Moscow and Kyiv continue to accuse each other of violating a new ceasefire.
Peace efforts around Ukraine are entering a new phase, with Moscow signaling openness to talks while setting conditions for any direct meeting. Speaking in Moscow after Russia's Victory Day commemorations on May 9th, Russian President Vladimir Putin said Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico had told him that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was ready for a personal meeting. But Putin said such a meeting should only take place once final peace agreements are ready to be signed, adding that talks in a third country would also be possible.
Whoever wants to meet can come. Let them come to Moscow and we will meet. A meeting in a third country is also possible, but only once final agreements have been reached on a peace treaty for a long-term historical perspective. To take part in this event and sign, but it must be a final step.
Putin also accused the West of fueling the confrontation with Russia, while saying he believed the conflict was coming to an end.
The West promised assistance and then began fueling a confrontation with Russia that continues to this day. I think that the matter is coming to an end, but it is a serious matter.
His comments came as Washington pushed for a temporary truce and a major prisoner exchange between the two sides. Russia and Ukraine agreed to a 3-day ceasefire from 9th to 11th May, along with a planned swap of 1,000 prisoners from each side. But both sides soon accused each other of violating the ceasefire. Russia's defense ministry said its forces had followed the truce, while accusing Ukraine of more than 8,970 violations, including shelling, drone strikes, and ground assaults. Moscow said Russian forces responded with retaliatory strikes against Ukrainian positions, command posts, and drone launch sites. Ukraine's military gave a different account, saying Russian forces had launched 51 attacks since early Saturday and continued shelling areas along the border. Kyiv said Russian troops had not stopped operations in several areas and were still trying to break through Ukrainian defenses. For now, both sides are publicly backing the idea of a prisoner swap. But the latest ceasefire dispute shows how fragile any wider peace effort remains.
Ukrainians in Kyiv are greeting the new 3-day ceasefire with caution rather than confidence. After years of attacks, many have expressed mixed feelings to the latest pause in hostilities.
Ukrainians in Kyiv reacted with skepticism on Friday to a US-brokered 3-day ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, saying they doubted it would lead to any lasting progress toward ending the war. Many residents said they expected fighting to resume once the brief pause ends, casting doubt on its long-term impact.
Russia is going to derail these peace talks and this ceasefire anyway.
Putin doesn't want that peace. He wants power, which is why he's waging war. Without power, he's nothing. We've always been a peaceful people. We want peace.
Others voiced mixed feelings, welcoming any temporary relief from attacks, but questioning whether it was fair to soldiers still fighting.
On the one hand, this is very good because honestly, the sleepless nights have gotten a bit tiresome. And on the other hand, maybe it's somehow wrong because for so many years in a row, our guys have been fighting, waging war for our homeland, for our country. But still, the odds are in favor of it being the right thing to do, that at least for a few days we'll be able to sleep in peace and without the attacks.
The war has continued with heavy missile, drone, and artillery exchanges in recent weeks, with no clear breakthrough in negotiations. The prospects for a broader peace deal remain uncertain as both sides remain divided on key conditions for ending the conflict.
At least 39 people have been killed in another day of intense Israeli strikes in Lebanon, the country's health ministry said. Israel's military said it struck Hezbollah terrorists operating from within a structure used for military purposes in the area, claiming they were preparing attacks against its soldiers. The military also said it was aware of reports of harm to civilians. Israeli forces and Hezbollah have continued to exchange fire since U.S. President Donald Trump announced a ceasefire agreement between the governments of Israel and Lebanon last month. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico has criticized the European Parliament, urging it to address internal European issues rather than targeting specific member states. His remarks follow a Parliament recommendation to suspend EU funding for Slovakia.
By the way, in Yerevan I witnessed an example of sovereign foreign policy, this time by Azerbaijan, whose president strongly criticized the European Parliament over various declarations and resolutions adopted against his country. President Aliyev spoke the truth when he said the European Parliament should primarily deal with European problems, and we have more than enough of those, rather than spreading falsehoods about others. I am sending the same message from Slovakia to the European Parliament, especially in connection with its latest gem, when it recommended that the European Commission suspend EU funds for us.
Now, U.S. President Donald Trump says troops withdrawn from Germany could be redeployed to Poland as divisions deepen between Washington and several European allies over the war in Iran. The Pentagon announced earlier in May that 5,000 American troops would be pulled out of Germany over the next 6 to 12 months. A senior Pentagon official said the move followed criticism from German Chancellor Friedrich Merz over Washington's handling of the Iran war. Germany currently hosts around 35,000 U.S. troops, more than any other country in Europe.
We have a great relationship with Poland. I have a great relationship with the president. You remember, I endorsed him, and he won. And he came from way behind and he won. He's a great fighter. He's a great guy. I like him a lot. So that's positive.
Now, Poland has signed a multi-billion euro defense loan deal under a new European Union financing program aimed at strengthening military readiness across the bloc. The deal, the first of its kind under the scheme, was signed by Poland's defense and finance ministers alongside EU officials. The funding will support the nation's defense industry, specifically air defense, anti-drone systems, and armor production. SAFE is a core component of the EU's broader strategy to enhance military readiness by 2030. Now, almost a month after the first passenger died of hantavirus aboard a cruise ship, the vessel has now reached the Canary Islands. Officials say passengers will be tested prior to their scheduled repatriation flights.
The cruise ship hit by a deadly hantavirus outbreak arrived near the port of Granadilla in Tenerife on Sunday. It comes almost a month after the first passenger died aboard the MV Hondius cruise ship. All passengers on the luxury vessel are considered high-risk contacts as a precautionary measure. Officials say the remaining passengers, none of whom have shown signs of infection, will be tested by Spanish health authorities to ensure they remain asymptomatic. A 1 nautical mile security perimeter will be enforced around the ship as it approaches the island, preventing it from reaching the shore. Once those on board have been tested, they will be transported to land in small boats for repatriation flights from the island's main airport. Following concerns from residents about the possibility of the virus spreading to the island, United Nations officials say the risk to the local population remains low.
This disease is not COVID, and we have said it many times as WHO. And when we say this, we don't take it lightly. And then, of course, the other issue I'd like to say, which I also indicated in my message to the people of Tenerife, is the risk to the population, to the local population, is low. One is because of the very nature of the disease itself, but second, the risk is low because the Spanish government has made all the preparations to prevent any problem.
Around 150 passengers and crew from 28 countries are believed to have originally been aboard the vessel, although dozens disembarked on the island of St. Helena last month. Hantavirus is usually spread by rodents, but in rare cases can be transmitted from person to person. The World Health Organization says the risk to the wider global population is low.
Neocolonialism is once again back on the United Nations agenda. The UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination has raised serious concerns over France's handling of developments in New Caledonia.
The UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination has adopted a statement on New Caledonia. The committee warned France about the situation resulting from its colonial policy in Kanaki and expressed serious concern. The statement highlighted that political and constitutional reforms regarding Kanaki should be implemented only with the participation of the local Kanak people in a free and transparent manner. The committee mentions that the third self-determination referendum held by France in Kanaki on December 12, 2021, coincided with a period of national mourning for the Kanak people. However, the legitimate calls by the local Kanak people to postpone the referendum were ignored by the French authorities. The statement specifically emphasizes that although the Kanak Senate of Traditions and the customary councils of the 8 regions representing the Kanak people have repeatedly made official appeals on this issue, their will and position have been completely ignored.
Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and French President Emmanuel Macron visited the Mamluk-era citadel in Alexandria on Saturday. The visit is part of Macron's official trip to Egypt. He toured the citadel of Qaibay, a 15th century fortress built by Sultan al-Sharaf Qaibay on the site of the ancient lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Following the tour, Sisi and Macron were scheduled to share a working dinner. The French president's stop in Egypt marks the first leg of an African tour that will include Kenya and Ethiopia. The United Nations and aid agencies are warning that Somalia is sliding deeper into a humanitarian crisis as drought, rising prices, and funding shortages leave millions facing severe hunger. Officials say children are among the hardest hit, with nearly 2 million now at risk of malnutrition.
Across parts of Somalia, dry land, dead livestock and overcrowded displacement camps are becoming increasingly common after years of insufficient rainfall. During a visit to the country, the UN Humanitarian Coordinator for Somalia, George Conway, warned that around 6.5 million people are expected to face severe food insecurity, while nearly 2 million children are at risk of malnutrition.
What we're seeing across the entire country is a malnutrition crisis. We simply don't have the resources to respond as we should do. This is made absolutely worse because of the Middle East crisis, which is raising prices across the whole country, fuel by 150%, even food commodities by at least 20 or 30%.
Aid agencies say 3 consecutive failed rainy seasons have devastated livelihoods, especially in regions dependent on livestock. Families displaced by drought described losing animals, homes and income as conditions continue to worsen.
Even when a little rain fell before, it did not last. That small amount is now gone. And if rain does not come soon, People may start dying, just like the livestock. People depended on livestock, and now the livestock are gone. Everything has been lost.
The World Food Programme says nearly 5 million people have already been affected by the crisis, with more than 200,000 displaced this year alone, most because of drought. Officials say the humanitarian response is also being strained by rising global costs linked to conflict in the Middle East, pushing up fuel and food prices across the country. Aid deliveries continue through supply routes, including the port of Berbera, where thousands of tons of food assistance are being received for Somalia and neighbouring Ethiopia.
Now, China posted stronger than expected trade figures in April, driven by a sharp rise in overseas demand. The latest data comes as global markets closely watch the economic impact of tensions in the Middle East.
China's exports grew faster than expected in April as overseas buyers rushed to secure supplies amid fears the Iran conflict could drive up global energy and transport costs. Customs data released on Saturday showed exports rose 14.1% year-on-year in US dollar terms, accelerating from 2.5% growth in March. Imports also remained strong, climbing 25.3% in April, while China's trade surplus widened to $84.8 billion from $51.13 billion a month earlier. Analysts said exporters have benefited from a wave of overseas orders as companies stockpile goods and components before potential cost increases linked to the Middle East conflict. Factory surveys last month showed new export orders reached their highest level in 2 years. Despite solid first-quarter economic growth of 5%, economists warned that prolonged geopolitical tensions and rising energy prices could weaken external demand in the months ahead, adding pressure to China's already sluggish consumer spending. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump is expected to visit China next week for talks with President Xi Jinping, with discussions likely to focus on trade, agriculture, and aviation sectors.
Now we'll take a look at the key stories shaping the region. NATO's Special Representative for the South Caucasus and Central Asia, Kevin Hamilton, is expected to visit Azerbaijan in the near future. The alliance says Hamilton's work is focused on strengthening dialogue and cooperation with countries in the South Caucasus, a region NATO describes as strategically important. He is currently in Georgia as part of his second regional trip since taking office after visiting Armenia early in April. Now, a Swedish media outlet says it has obtained a confidential Russian document allegedly detailing a campaign to influence Armenia's upcoming parliamentary elections and weaken Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan politically. According to Blank Spot, the document outlines plans to turn the vote into a public referendum on Pashinyan's leadership and prevent his political image from improving before the election. The report says the document does not identify a preferred opposition force, but describes the methods aimed at shaping public opinion against the Armenian government. Now, cargo movement between Azerbaijan and Armenia is continuing to expand, with new oil product exports and transit shipments from Russia moving along regional rail routes.
Azerbaijan continues to export oil products to Armenia as cargo movement between the two countries grows. The latest batch includes 16 rail cars carrying 986 tons of diesel fuel. So far, Azerbaijan has exported 9,000 tons of diesel, 979 tons of RON 92 petrol, and 2,955 tons of RON 95 petrol to Armenia. Russian cargo also continues to pass through Azerbaijan on its way to Armenia. The latest transit shipments include 6 rail cars carrying 406 tons of fertilizer and 4 rail cars carrying 276 tons of grain from Bilajari station in Baku toward Boyuk-Kasik station on Azerbaijan's border with Georgia. To date, more than 27,000 tons of grain, over 4,000 tons of fertilizer, 133 tons of aluminium, and 68 tons of buckwheat have been sent from Russia to Armenia in transit through Azerbaijan. The shipments underline the growing use of Azerbaijan's rail routes for both direct exports and regional transit.
Now, on Saturday, Armenian Parliament Speaker Alen Simonian said that while the peace established between Yerevan and Baku is now a reality, it still requires careful attention and sustained effort to preserve. He stressed that in today's complex and unstable geopolitical environment, maintaining peace is not a one-time achievement, but an ongoing responsibility that must be actively safeguarded. Pakistani authorities are investigating an attack on a police post in the northwest city of Banu that killed at least 12 police personnel and injured others. Officials say the assault involved a car bombing followed by gunfire targeting responding officers.
Pakistani authorities say multiple police personnel were killed after attackers targeted a police checkpoint in the northwestern city of Banu. Police sources say an explosives-filled vehicle struck the checkpoint near the Afghan border before armed attackers entered the compound and opened fire. Ambulances transported injured victims to hospitals. Authorities declared an emergency at government medical facilities in the city.
In the attack on the police post, the figures received so far at District Headquarters Hospital Banu are that the bodies of police personnel have been received. Similarly, there were injured people, comprising civilians and police personnel.
The blast heavily damaged the checkpoint, leaving collapsed structures, damaged police vehicles, and debris scattered across the area as excavators cleared rubble. Police sources also said drones were used during the assault, while officials warned the casualty toll could rise as operations continue. The militant alliance Ittihad-ul-Mujahideen Pakistan claimed responsibility for the attack.
I own an electrical shop, which I have been running for the past 10 to 12 years. Due to the attack on the checkpoint yesterday, my shop suffered heavy financial losses.
The incident took place in a region that has seen repeated attacks targeting security forces in recent years.
Now, Turkmenistan is set to host a high-level consultative meeting of Central Asian countries and Azerbaijan on October 8, 2026 in the Awaza National Tourist Zone. Officials say preparations are already underway for meetings of foreign ministers ahead of the Awaza summit, as well as the upcoming session of the Council of Heads of State of the Commonwealth of Independent States. All right, that's all we have for now. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.